Hello and welcome to Gadabout United's My Seasons United Fan 92-93. After doing the 91-92 season last edition, it felt like there shouldn't be much of a skip to a completely different period in my United supporting life, as the 1991-92 season and this one seemed to be almost like a two-parter. If part 1 was about the heartache at the shocking title crumble to Leeds, failing to secure the last ever First Division title for English top-flight football, this season would be completely different in almost every way. But before we get started in earnest, if you could do a quick click on the subscribe button and press a thumbs up, I'd appreciate it, and it'll help the channel grow and reach far more fellow Reds. So back in the summer of 92, when we were being informed by Sky Sports, who had acquired the rights for the new inaugural Premier League season, that it was going to be a whole new ballgame. As we'd all known for a number of months now, the Football League had lost its grip on its premium competition to the FA, who with its 22 club founder members created the Premier League, which essentially meant a lot more money for televised games that would be far more in depth and based on the US model of American football presenting, including Monday Night Football. However, as Reds, still hungover from throwing away one of our best chances at a title for 25 years, we were wondering, had Fergie and the boys learnt from the lessons last year? And could the club finally complete its 26-year quest to regain the title as champions of England? Before we start moving through this maiden Premier League season, first we need to do a little bit of housekeeping. We only have one major rule change to mention, and that was the introduction of the back pass rule, one of the best and biggest changes to the game since I started watching it. As for United, apart from the 42 league game programme and the domestic cups, Fergie and the boys would be competing in Europe, in the UEFA Cup, a trophy United still hadn't won. With the demolition and rebuilding of the Stretford end, with Old Trafford legally being obliged to become an all-seater stadium, fans were given free plastic disposable mats to help keep off the elements when parts of the ground were ready to be reopened. Like a number of clubs, we could say we were affected by the lack of core support from that part of the ground, especially early in the campaign. Fergie knew there was some mandatory transfer business needed. Realising that a lack of goals and massive pressure on McLaren Hughes to score the lion's share of them, Fergie was in the hunt for an elite striker. For the second season in a row, we made Alan Shearer, Southampton's prolific 21-year-old goal machine, his priority. However, after believing he'd done enough to bring him to Old Trafford, the marksman felt differently and instead signed for newly promoted Blackburn, whose multi-millionaire chairman had £100 million behind him to aim to bring the Premier League title to Ewood Park for the first time. Instead of signing Shearer, we snagged Dion Dublin, and I was vastly underwhelmed by the signing of the Cambridge United striker for a cool £1 million. There were no other noticeable arrivals at Old Trafford that summer, and to me and other United fans that was of some concern. Was Dion Dublin really enough quality to make the difference this season when surely a big name, already blooded in the top flight, would have made more sense? On the other side, there were two noticeable departures. Mal Donaghy left for Chelsea for £150,000, but more sadly and unsurprisingly, Mark Robins, who was never able to hold down any sort of place in the side, despite providing Fergie with some crucial goals, went to Norwich for $800,000. We seemed to be fairly fortunate with our opening fixtures, with no really big size to challenge us early on. First up was Sheffield United, and incredibly, playing the Yorkshire side, who were average at best, we conceded 2 Brian Deane goals, before Sparky pulled one back with half an hour to go, but to no avail. More unbelievably, our first home match of the season was Fergie's second ever worst defeat at Old Trafford, as Everton tore us apart, winning 3-0. It was already starting to look quite worrying, and a further failure to beat newly promoted Ipswich again at Old Trafford was another seemingly ominous sign, despite a quality strike by Dennis Irwin. What made this all worse was Mark Robins was free scoring at Norwich and had bagged an opening day Highbury hat-trick, and Shearer was already doing the business in East Lancashire. There was a definite sinking feeling regarding the acquisitions we'd made, or acquisition. An away game on the south coast is one of the last things you want with 1 point from the opening 3 matches, but Dion Dublin had other ideas, as he pounced onto McClare's misdirected header to grab an 88th minute winner. That victory moved United out of the bottom 3, but a trip to the City ground against a Forest side that had already beaten us twice that year, mortally wounding our title dreams, was going to be the toughest challenge yet. However, a very solid 2-0 win with a Welsh 1-2, a powerful strike from Sparky followed by a second half Giggs header, took all 3 points back to Manchester. We also ended a month a point behind champions Leeds, who were also struggling, as the unlikely trio of Blackburn, QPR and Norwich occupied the top 3 positions respectively. There were a couple of testing league matches in September with a visit from Leeds and a trip to White Hart Lane to meet Spurs, but overall it looked like a good set of fixtures to move forward with after those 2 recent away wins against Saints and Forest. Also this month would start United's cup exploits in Europe, in the UEFA Cup against Russian side Torpedo Moscow, and in the League Cup against Brighton in a 2-legged tie. The first Premier League match of the month was against Crystal Palace, and it changed Manchester United's fortunes forever. It wasn't a result, although it was 3 points thanks to Mark Hughes' 88th minute strike, but instead it was a tragic incident in the middle of the park. Just before half-time, Palace defender Eric Young, still fresh from his Wimbledon playing days, made a crunching tackle on Dion Dublin, breaking the new recruit's leg, essentially ruling him out for the rest of the season. As sad as that was for Dublin, it led to United's fresh pursuit for a necessary and superior replacement. Sheffield Wednesday's David Hirst was top of Fergie's shopping list, but a whopping £3 million bid was turned down by Owls boss Trevor Francis. The Blades' Brian Deane was also touted. In the next game, Leeds were turned over surprisingly easily, as Bruce and Kanchelskis gave United a 2-0 half-time lead. Sparky then hit the post after robbing Gary Speed of the ball in the second half, but the score remained the same. Nevertheless, it was a major scalp. Strangely, next up were Everton. The fixture computer had spat out a weird pairing of home and away games, as on the 12th of September, just 3 weeks after the 3-0 drubbing at Old Trafford, we had to go to Goodison Park. A confident first-half finish from McClare, and then a second-half penalty from Bruce, earned some swift revenge for the Reds, as we took the 3 points back to Old Trafford and completed a run of 5 straight wins that took us up to third. The penultimate game in September came against Spurs, where Ryan Giggs scored one of the most precocious goals of his career, nutmegging a Tottenham defender, then taking it wide of keeper Ian Walker before finishing sublimely from a tight angle. However, it wasn't enough to claim all 3 points as the game ended 1 apiece. With the last game of the month ending in a disappointing goalless draw against QPR, we ended September in 5th spot. Just looking at the table, it was a really eclectic mix of clubs who were the early front-runners in the title race, with no Liverpool or Arsenal present. Only Leeds, down in 8th, along with United, resembled any sort of normality in the top places. Despite the good run, if last season's disappointment and the last couple of games had taught us anything, we desperately needed another striker. Thankfully, transfer windows were not a thing yet to nix this. Into Europe, and we had an embarrassing exit from the UEFA Cup thanks to Torpedo Moscow. Again hamstrung by the limiting UEFA 3+2 rule, which had punished us for having British players in an English league. A dour 0-0 draw in Manchester was replicated in Moscow. Mark Hughes was sent off for a second yellow, but in the shootout itself we threw a 2-0 lead away after 2 penalties apiece. Then misses from usually designated penalty takers Bruce and McClare, and then decisively by Pallister, saw us exit the competition. However, one of the things that cost us by the end of the season last time out was 5 games in 11 days, due to cup progression, and an early exit from this tertiary European competition could well be a blessing in disguise come April. Back to Blighty in the League Cup. Brighton were narrowly dispatched over 2 legs with a 1-1 draw on the South Coast and a terrific Danny Wallace goal, before being followed by a 1-0 Mark Hughes win at Old Trafford in early October. Moving into October, United had a couple of tricky games to play, and this time, unlike last season, some ground to make up. A mediocre draw on Teesside against Middlesbrough saw Bruce make amends for his missed penalty in Moscow, but the boys couldn't hold on to the lead and had to settle for a 1-1 scoreline against the newly promoted club. On the road to glory, there are milestones in a campaign where you can point to a specific moment or match where something was defined. You can argue that Dion Dublin's goal against Southampton and his cruel injury were 2 of them, but this match against Liverpool was a definite third. 2 down at half-time, our title credentials were taking a hit. However, a fantastic Blackmore ball forward to Hughes saw a sublime volley from the master of the art to pull one back with a little over 10 minutes remaining, and then 10 minutes after that, another Welshman, Ryan Giggs, provided Sparky with an inviting cross for a diving header to grab a joyous point. It's that sort of game that builds character and resilience in a side, and would stand us in good stead later on in the season. A goalless draw against high-flying Blackburn wasn't a bad result in the grand scheme of things, but the following match at Old Trafford, a 1-0 defeat to Wimbledon, was. As you can see, the top 8 was still full of unfashionable sides, although Arsenal had regained some form to start mounting a challenge themselves, and Villa, under Big Ron, were looking a far better prospect than last term and earlier in the season. They would be the Red Devils' next league opponents at Villa Park. However, before they'd meet in the league, they'd first meet in the League Cup, also in the West Midlands. A United side still without their inspirational captain Brian Robson succumbed to a 75th minute Dean Saunders strike, which saw Villa progress at United's expense. With Villa, Oldham and then Arsenal, November looked like another tricky month on paper. However, Robson was back for the league meeting with the Villains, as was Lee Sharp after a 7-month layoff, but it was to no avail. Daly and Atkinson's lone goal of the game after just 10 minutes was enough for the 3 points, and it was typical that he and Saunders were the match winners in those games, as they were the deadly duo for Villa in that campaign, ably supported by Dwight Yorke. The Villa side was full of veterans and solid pros, and that win came towards the end of a 10-match unbeaten run that sent the Claret and Blue to the top of the league. After a 7-game barren spell with only 4 goals and 5 points from a possible 21 available, normal service was resumed against Oldham, who United had made a habit of taking the 3 points off since the Latics returned to the top flight. A McClare brace and a Hughes effort did the damage in a 3-0 win. That victory came on the 21st of November, and most of you'll know what's coming next, and is definitely one of those milestones I was talking about. Just before we get to it, on the 23rd of November, Neil Webb was brought back to Forest for $800,000 by Brian Clough. However, a mere 3 days after that, an alleged chance phone call that's become legendary between Alex Ferguson and Howard Wilkinson, who was apparently sniffing around with the hope of bringing Dennis Irwin back to Leeds, actually saw Fergie not only snub that approach, but also somehow get Eric Cantona on the table. I don't know what actually went on, but Fergie's account sounds too convenient to me, and at just 1.2 million, there were rumours aplenty at the time regarding the real reason for the switch, which I'm not going to mention here, what I heard, but if you have any info, please feel free to comment below. Regardless, by the 27th of November the deal was done. Eric Cantona signed and was exactly the tonic the side needed. And whilst I wasn't happy with bringing the man who destroyed my, or should I say our, title dreams just several months before, the rest of the red half of Manchester was so elated that I kept stum and went with it, and was glad I did. Not signed in time for the trip to Highbury, Eric sat in the stands, and it was already seemed that his mere presence was inspiration for Hughes and McClare to up their games. With their places under threat, Sparky answered the call, bundling the ball over the line after a looping, deflected Lee Sharp cross for the only goal of the game. November ended with unlikely leaders Norwich still top, commanding a 5-point lead over Blackburn, despite Rovers already having beaten them 7-1 in August, hence the goal difference anomaly between the two that you can see. On the face of it, December looked like it'd be a testing month, with the Manchester derby, a visit from leaders Norwich, and away trips to Chelsea and Sheffield Wednesday to navigate. The derby saw Eric make his first appearance in a red shirt, albeit as a sub. However, it was Paul Ince who gave us the lead with a cracking drive into the bottom corner from the edge of the area. Cantona then came on for Giggs at half-time, but it was Hughes' looping volley from outside the area that made it 2-0. Niall Quinn pulled one back with little under a quarter of an hour to go, but it wasn't enough, and Manchester was red again that night. Pushing us up to 5th spot, it was a real 6-pointer against Norwich in the next game, and a defensive error handed Sparky a gilt-edged chance to score, which he took, and it ended up being the winner. That moved United into 3rd, now 6 points behind the Canaries. A visit to Stamford Bridge against 4th place Chelsea was going to be a further test in a period of really challenging matches, but it turned out to be Eric Cantona's first goal for the club. Lee Sharp's run down the left was eventually turned in by the Frenchman as he spun on a sixpence in the pouring rain, resulting in an equaliser that ended up in a point. Another milestone, and yes, there are a few, came at Sheffield Wednesday. We found ourselves 3-0 down to the Owls after 61 minutes, and the scoreline was starting to look quite worrying. However, a brace from McClare, making the score 3-2 with 10 minutes to go, then saw an heroic goal from Cantona just 4 minutes later to equalise, as the Wednesday defenders did their traditional headless chicken impression, as was customary at the time. Like the 2-2 draw versus Liverpool in October, this comeback really showed United's mettle and further galvanised a side that was starting to play some really good football again. The next game at home to Coventry really showed our dominance, inflicting a deserved trouncing over the Sky Blues 5-0, and it could have been far more. This put us into 2nd spot moving into the new year, just 3 points behind Norwich, who hadn't won since we'd played them, and they had a vastly inferior goal difference to us. The Villa were level on points with us, with Blackburn slipping to 4th after losing Shearer to injury for the rest of the season during their victory over Leeds. In contrast to December, on paper, the January fixture list looked far more doable, but before all of that, we welcomed Les Sealey back to the club from Villa on the 6th of the month. As it was in 92, it would be repeated in 93, as the first home league game of the calendar year would end up 4-1, but thankfully to us this time. This match was one where we really clicked against the Spurs sides that weren't mugs. Their keeper, Eric Torsvett, was brilliant in the first half, and to be fair, the scoreline could have been even more flattering, but it was his namesake that ran the show that day who really demonstrated his worth. Despite scoring the opening goal with a looping header, Cantona's genius was demonstrated with a pass using the outside of his right foot in a 1-2 with Dennis Irwin that flicked over the defence, allowing the Irishman to finish with confidence. A Brian McClare beauty from outside the box and Paul Parker's first goal for the club showed just how far we'd come since spring last year, and for the first time that season, we really looked like championship challengers against a really top opposition. The following game at Loftus Road was more of the same as we tore apart QPR. Paul Ince's overhead kick and Giggs's superb lob put us into a 2-0 first half lead, but the Hoops grabbed one back just before the break. Fortunately, Andrei Kanchelskis was being his electric best and running on to their next set of a long throw from Schmeichel. His goal sealed the points, and we were starting to get wins where we failed to get them the season before. Another thing that we had more of this season than in the previous campaign was luck. A massively deflected Paul Ince shot from 30 yards opened the scoring at home to Forest, and that lead was doubled with a cracking Sparky shot on the half volley. Now we'd got the double over Forest, something that cost us the year before. However, everything wasn't completely rosy yet, and we got a kick up the behind against Ipswich at Portman Road, as the new boys won 2-1, ending our 10-match unbeaten run, where we'd taken 24 points from 30. United ended the month a point behind Norwich, level with Villa, but whilst the Canaries were slipping a bit, Villa, like us, were on the ascendancy. We got a kind draw in the FA Cup third round, pairing us with Bury. The Shakers were swept aside with the only goals of the season for Mike Phelan and Keith Gillespie. That led to a fourth round tie with Brighton again, and we progressed in a turgid game with a late Giggs goal. Next up would be a fifth round tie away at Sheffield United in February, who had already beaten us at Bramall Lane on the first day of the season. There were a couple of tricky away days scheduled for February at Anfield and Elland Road, but our three home fixtures looked very winnable. That started with our cup opponent Sheffield United, where the character building earlier in the season, coming back from a goal down, really gave us the steel to fight back against adversity. Franz Carr gave the visitors the lead, but goals from McClare and a win from Cantona secured the victory. We were lucky to get a 0-0 draw at Leeds, with Lee Chapman missing the type of chance he would never have spurned 12 months ago. More resilience was shown in our next home match against Southampton. It was another game where we inexplicably found ourselves a goal down, but showed that fortitude again to come back. A double from Giggs in the 82nd and 83rd minutes, showing such precociousness, warned sides coming to Old Trafford that we will never give up, which was a huge psychological advantage. The last league fixture of the month was far more straightforward with the 3-0 win over Borough. United and Villa were almost neck and neck by this point, and with 4 wins from 5 in the month, the Villains were also putting their foot on the gas. In the Cup, despite Giggs putting us ahead with an absolute cracker in our new yellow and green halves Newton Heath commemorative shirt, the Yorkshire club struck back twice in the next 10 minutes to take the lead, and despite having over half the match to equalise, missing a penalty in the process, we were dumped out. Our sights were now set solely on the title, and there would be no fixture pile-up to contend with this time around. March's matches were daunting, with Liverpool, Villa, Arsenal and City all to play. This would be a real test of our title credentials. It started well enough at Anfield, an opening goal from Hughes, a header gave the boys a half-time lead, but Ian Rush equalised early in the second half. Fortunately, the Scousers keeper David James, a massive £2 million signing from Watford, was already doing the thing that would make him notorious, being calamitous, and his failure at a United corner gave McClare the easiest of headers to nod in a winner. Remarkably, the easiest fixture on paper, away to Oldham, was the only one we lost in March, as our struggling neighbours took all 3 points through a first half Neil Adams strike. Fortunately, their desperation would help us out as the season would come to an end. The biggest game of the season was at Old Trafford, as Villa met us in a summit clash, as we lay in first and second positions with virtually no difference between us. Nerves were frayed after Steve Staunton's 53rd minute strike that found the top corner. The feeling of everything slipping away was palpable after last year's traumatic events, and if Villa had won that, they'd have had a significant psychological edge over us with just 10 games to go. With amazing Old Trafford support, the Reds went back on the attack immediately, and after some sustained pressure, Irwin's cross to the back post was then nodded back into the 6-yard box by Cantona, where Hughes' head met the ball violently from close range, giving former United keeper in the Villa goal, Mark Bosnich, no chance. The game ended 1-1, and with the run-ins that both sides had, with 9 games left, it was anybody's. The derby match at Main Road was going to be as intense as the corresponding fixture the year before, but City were a much better side now. The Blues would want nothing more than to scupper our chances, and Niall Quinn did his best by opening the scoring just before the hour mark. However, the combination of a Lee Sharp cross and a Cantona header with less than 20 minutes to go levelled up the game, and we had to settle for a point. Meanwhile, Villa's home win against Wednesday put them top. The corresponding Arsenal match at Old Trafford was a tight affair, and we drew the game 0-0. But more importantly, in Villa's fixture, they lost to Norwich. But we dropped down to third by the end of the month. There was no room for error from now on. There was a lot of apprehension going to Carrow Road. Norwich were making one last ditch effort for the title. Villa were lying in wait for a slip, and apart from last season, our record in East Anglia wasn't the best over the last 5 years or so. However, the game can be summed up by saying it was a blitzkrieg of a first half for us. In an 8-minute period between the 13th and 21st minutes, we scored 3 fantastic goals, all on the break, tearing the Canaries' defence to ribbons. Giggs beat the offside trap for the first, rounding gun and finishing confidently. The second was a kind of devastating break at speed that would be our trademark for the whole of the 90s. And when you have Andrei Kanchelskis on the end of a perfect McClare through ball, there can only be one outcome. And finally, Ince's powerful run, whose pass found an unmarked Cantona, just showed how important he was to us. Old boy Mark Robbins' consolation did little to impact the game that was well over before half-time. Norwich would just take 7 points from the next 15 available, and their challenge foundered. Can you have 2 milestones in 2 matches? Well, the Norwich game was clearly one, but then the next game against Sheffield Wednesday was certainly one too. It's gone down in Premier League as well as United folklore. Wednesday had gone ahead just after the hour mark with a penalty after a terrible challenge by Ince on Waddle, giving substitute referee John Hilditch no choice. Incidentally, the original referee picked up an injury just before that, meaning that there was going to be a lot of injury time. 7 minutes to be exact. However, just after the penalty went in, the mood inside Old Trafford turned to one of shock and fear. But whilst a game like this might have got the better of us last season, the boys were made of sterner stuff this time around. Steve Bruce's header in the 86th minute levelled the scores. The gloom immediately evaporated and the crowd acted like the proverbial extra man. Into the 6th minute of injury time, a deflected Gary Pallister cross fell kindly to the incoming Bruce, who buried the header past Chris Woods. Assistant manager Brian Kidd celebrated on the pitch with Fergie, and the final whistle blew a minute later. This must have been a shock to the system to the Villa camp. United went top as the Midlands club could only manage a poor goalless draw at home to Coventry. It was the Claret and Blues who were succumbing to the pressure of this 2-horse race. However, speaking of Coventry, that was United's next game on the road, and it was won with a terrific strike from Dennis Irwin from outside the box. The following match against Chelsea, a side that had inexplicably had always done well at Old Trafford, was swept aside with a huge shot that Besant fluffed. A Steve Clarke own goal and a Cantona header from a skillful Giggs run and lob was the third. Fortune was seemingly in our favour, but Villa had also won their respective games at this time, against Arsenal away and City at home, so it'd be down to the last 3 matches. The 21st of April essentially destroyed Villa's title dreams. Whilst they lost 3-0 at Blackburn, we travelled to South London to play Palace. 2 second-half goals, a classic volley from Hughes after a Cantona cross, and then finishing it off, another driving run from Ince, culminating in a precise finish with a minute to go, sealed the match. The support that night was incredible, with a ton of Reds all over the ground, in with the Palace fans. After an excruciating 11-day wait after that result, Villa did the hard work for us. Clearly affected by the Palace and Blackburn results, the Brummie side finally threw in the towel after losing 1-0 at home to an Oldham side who had to win to stay up. In essence, the Latics' Nick Henry scored the goal that handed us the league title, and the whole of Manchester went, well, the Red side, which is the majority of it, absolutely insane. The following day, we played Blackburn at Old Trafford, which is where we'd received the trophy. My mate paid £100 for a ticket, which seems pittance nowadays, considering the thousands of pounds that exchange hands just for Ronaldo's homecoming. But for a kid at school, possibly 10 times face value, it was a lot. And looking back, it was totally worth it. In the game itself, despite going behind to Kevin Gallagher's goal, Ryan Giggs' free kick equaliser was textbook and saw us go into the break at 1-1. Into the second half, Ince put us back into the lead, and Gary Pallister took his first and last free kick that close to an opposition goal in the last minute, and got his first of the season. Steve Bruce, who had captained the side for the majority of the season in club captain Brian Robson's absence due to injury, and Captain Marvel himself, lifted the trophy. The final game at Selhurst Park against Wimbledon was the icing on the cake, and we extended our run to 7 wins, beating them 2-1, with Brian Robson's first of the season adding to Paul Ince's earlier strike. After the previous year's heartbreak, this was just the tonic, and it was possibly won in part due to that disappointment, with Fergie ensuring that the players, the club, the fans and himself would not go through that again. The boss also resolved the striker issue and obtained the talisman that the club needed, as Leeds had done 10 months prior. It came due to Dion Dublin's injury, which, whilst it was terrible for him, and maybe a tad dark to say, was the instance that changed the fortunes of the club for the better. There are a few Reds who lived through it, like me, who could deny that. If you don't believe me, look where the defending champions Leeds ended up. 2 points off relegation, without a single away win. The experience in '92 led us not to throw away silly crucial points, which is exactly what Villa did this time around. Since we played our top of the table clash in March, Villa had won 4, drew 1 and lost 4. We'd won 7 and drew 2. There was little margin for error, but if they'd won their remaining games, they'd have been champions, instead of losing the title by 10 points. Those milestones I mentioned along the way put us in great stead for that title-winning run-in. Individual performances all over the pitch of 8 or 9 and even 10 out of 10. Every single game in this crucial latter stage of the season was the difference. Giggsy even earned himself a record second PFA Young Player of the Year award that season. Furthermore, we vastly improved our record against the top 6. Instead of 8 points from 30 we got last season, we got 20. And at the other end, instead of 8 points from 18 against the bottom 3, we got 16. We scored 4 more goals and conceded 2 fewer than 91-92, earning us 6 more points, a crucial difference. Finally, we had the luck that seemingly abandoned us in the last campaign, and we benefited from exiting all the cup competitions relatively early, freeing up our fixture list. These small margins are what titles are made of. Anyway, what are your memories of the 1992-93 season? And if you're around, do you remember what you did to celebrate? Please comment below, and if you haven't already done so, please like, share and subscribe. As always, thank you for your support.